All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about React Router DOM. We've been talking about React for a while and the way it renders, but we haven't gone over the navigating of our application. Before, we had talked about forms and how we handle forms, and we talked about preventing the default behavior of a form. And a specific question was asked of why are we preventing the default behavior of the form if it seems like it's something built in? What we're trying to create here is called a single page application, meaning everything is rendered within one HTML template. And the way that we can visualize this is as such, right? We have our browser on the upper side of our screen. Our browser makes a request to our Vite server that grabs index HTML. Index HTML then has a division named root. And inside of that division named root, with the ID of root, excuse me, we have main.jsx, which we can see it grabs the document by ID of root. So it grabs that div and it renders all of the contents of app.jsx. And that's how we can see the content of app.jsx showing up on the screen. So a request from the browser goes to Vite. Vite sends back index.html. Index.html goes into main.jsx and says, hey, what do I need to render here? Main.jsx grabs the division of root and renders the app.jsx application. We've covered this a couple of times, but today we're going to strictly go into our root and change it so that instead of just rendering app.jsx, we are also going to be rendering a multitude of pages or different content nested within app.jsx. Now we're going to get the visual effect that there is different pages that are being altered or that are being passed through this um, app.jsx. But in reality, there's still only going to be just one page that gets rendered on the screen. The one page being rendered on the screen being index.html at app.jsx, but we're essentially just switching which page will be showing up inside of app.jsx. And we'll make that connection here shortly once we actually start going into React Router DOM. All right, with that said, does anyone have any questions regarding the topics that we'll be covering today? All right, if no one has any questions, let's go ahead and dive into React Router DOM. So the first thing we're going to take a look at here is I like going over to the React Router DOM page, and you can see that it takes me to create browser router. This is what we'll be utilizing today to actually create our routing capabilities. I'll go ahead and share this in the Yankee Questions channel so that everybody has this documentation available to them. And we can see that it pretty much gives me a way of creating a router where I can describe URL paths, elements that will be triggered by said URL paths, loaders, which we'll talk about later on in this program, and then children. All right. Well, first let's start going into how we can connect all of these pieces with one another. Here I am, my npm project. If I run ls, you can see that I have node modules and package.json, which means I've already installed this project. Now I'm going to go ahead and install a development dependency, which is going to be React Router DOM. I'm going to run npm install React Router DOM. Let me go ahead and open up package.json so we can see it. All right, so here's package.json. If I scroll down to dependencies, you can see that all I have is React DOM, React, and in dev dependencies, I just have everything related to React in itself. Well, I go ahead and install React Router DOM. I now have a new line here on line 15, which says, hey, this project also needs React Router DOM in order to work properly. And next, I'm going to go ahead and make some pages here. So I'm going to go into my source tab. And here I'm going to make a directory named pages. Now, pages and components are very similar. They work exactly the same, right? Essentially, a page is a component. The only reason why I put it in a separate directory named pages is for organizational purposes. It's just for me to make sure that I know, hey, these components in here are pages, and these components in my other directory named components are just fragments that are being utilized inside of pages. All right. So now that I have my directory of pages, I'm going to go ahead and change directory into pages. And I'm going to create a couple of separate files. So I'm going to make a home.jsx. I'm going to make an about. And I am not sure. Let's go ahead and make one last one. What do we think? Let's do a contact us. Why not? All right. So then we have 3 separate pages. I'm going to go ahead and start filling them out now. So starting off with the home page, can somebody walk me through creating a function that will return JSX, so it will actually return HTML, and all I wanted to return is an H1 that says homepage. How would I go about creating this component?
Function homepage.
All right, let's do function homepage. All right, so now I've created the function of homepage. Let's pass it off to, let's see. Oh, there you go. Demo. Let's hear it.
Do you have the React extension and you could just do the RFC?
I don't think so. What is it? RSC?
RFC? RF Foxtrot Charlie? Yeah. That's the extension maybe if you guys want to get it, but it's just if you type in on extensions on the left, you might have enough already, but uh yeah, it's just like a shorthand just for typing this out.
Okay, awesome. Yeah,
What's it called?
Just React. So if you just search up on the extensions React, um it'll pull up as like React ES7 or something like that. And then yeah, if you install it and then if you type in RFC, it's like React functional something, I think is the shorthand for it.
yeah, it's React functional component. And if you could grab the link off of your VS Code and share it on Yankee Questions, that would probably be super helpful for everybody.
I got you guys.
I do want to warn everybody regarding extensions or anything that does autofill. If you step into an interview and they don't have the capability for you to utilize autofill and you don't know how to build this template of creating a function, that could be a problem. So don't rely too heavily on extensions. All right. So now we have our function homepage. And as I mentioned before, I wanted to return JSX. And the JSX that I wanted to return is an H1 element that says homepage. How do I go about doing that?
You'd start by, you'd want to have the open and close tags,
All right.
and then you just put a home page. And then if you planned on putting in any more elements or tags, HTML tags, you'd want to have like the open closed arrows and then have everything in between that. That or a div. You just need a parent, one singular parent.
Got it. So implement a parent tag. And in this case, it would be a fragment tag. Fantastic. Okay, now how do I make this function accessible in other files? How would I go about exporting this function here?
Just export default homepage.
Perfect. There you go. So there's our homepage function. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for contact page, and we'll do the same thing for the about page. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and copy, paste, and then I'll just overwrite where it says homepage. So now we can see we have a function that returns an H1 element that says contact page, and contact page is being exported. Now we can do it again for the about page. And there you go. We have 3 separate pages, all with different H1 elements, but still returning an H1, and they're all their independent pages. Now, let's start applying these in our router, or at the very minimum, applying them in app.jsx, right? I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of all the shabam bam that comes in my React template, including some of these use states. Get rid of the CSS. All right. And now in app.jsx, I'm just going to go ahead and put h1. This is the app. And let's run this server. All right, so our server is currently running. It opened up on a separate browser. Let me bring that over here. All right, and that's all we have. We have this is the app. How can I get all of these pages to show up inside of app.jsx at once?
You can take out the the H1 tag.
Okay.
And then just add in, I think it's just like the close in, like the basically like how you have the fragment, and then just insert the name of the file, which actually you don't have an import statement. So you want to import the home page, the contact page, and the about page up top. So import about page, just as you have it typed out in the JSX. Yep. And then from dot/pages/ about page.jsx, and then you'll just do the same thing for contact and home page.
All right. All right, so currently we're getting an error here. It's telling
Uh,
me,
you in your from statements you have SGX instead of JSX.
all right, let's do that. There you go, perfect. So now
Oh,
we get home page. We can see that I'm calling the actual element in there. We can bring in about page. We can bring in contact page. Right, we can also take off this whole, this is the app, and we can see all of them rendering at once. So now we have all of our pages, and you can see how they're just essentially components, right? We're still able to call them and utilize them within our application. Now, how do I add the routing capability? Well, I could go into creating a function that would interact with the URL pattern and then essentially just run an if statement, right? I could do something like, hey, window dot current location, and this is probably not the correct thing. We'll just call this current URL. This is all pseudocode, everyone, so please don't judge, all right? And then I can say, hey, if current URL is equal to a backslash, then I want you to render the home page. Right, and I could also have it where else if current URL is equal to contact, then I want you to render the contact page. And then I would essentially do the same thing here. And I would check that it is equal to about. And in this case, I would return the about page. So here's one way that I could go about creating a function that would handle my routing, right? But as pages increase and as arguments increase that I need to pass into these pages, this may not be the best way to handle this information or to ensure that this rotation of components and data is being handled properly, right? So that's where React Router DOM comes in. So now let's go into plugging all of this in so that we can actually utilize React Router DOM to manipulate our URL pattern and show independent pages on the screen. So in a separate terminal, I'm going to run ls. You can see that I am inside of the parent directory of my project. I'm going to change directories into source. And inside of source, I'm going to create a router that will resemble the documentation that comes from the React Router DOM, or excuse me, from React Router DOM. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and touch router.jsx. That will create a router. And inside of router, I'm going to import create browser router from React Router DOM. What that will do is it will allow me to call that function, which I'm going to save its return value as a variable named router. And what this function takes in is an array of objects. So I am calling the function create browser router, and I'm going to save its return statement inside of this variable named router. Now I know the pages that I want to show, so I'm going to go ahead and import all of them. And actually, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste all my import statements from up above. All right, so here I have my about page, my home page, my contact page, and I want to actually import the app itself. All right, so there's all three of my pages and my entire application, which is being rendered in Vue, right? So now I have all three of my pages and my entire application rendered in Vue, which is app.jsx. So now let's go into creating our browser, our router browser. In this case, I'm going to talk about the path that will render this component. It will be a slash. This will be, inside of the slash, the element that I want to render will be my application. My entire application should render when this path is being called. And then we'll knock into children here shortly. All right, now in app.jsx, I'm going to go ahead and comment out all three of these pages just to make sure that they don't get in our way. We can see that we have this is the app. But currently, the router isn't being utilized anywhere, right? I'm not connecting this router anywhere. I'm going to export default router so that I can utilize it inside of another web page. Or excuse me, inside of another file. I'm going to come over to main.jsx. Remember, main.jsx is utilized to compile everything before actually feeding it to index.html. And we could see down here, it gives us the function that we want to utilize to give the router to index.html. So I'm going to change this. I'm going to go ahead and import router provider from React Router DOM. And I'm going to change lines 8 through 10, in which I'll go ahead and call router provider, where the router is equal to the router that I've just created. All right, so router provider takes in one prop. That prop is the router, which should be a return value from create browser router. So create browser router is created. It goes through this HTML context and knows what it's supposed to return to the router. It compiles all of the code, returns it to the router. Router provider then grabs that division of root and feeds the entire application. Because remember, that's the first element we're rendering is the entire application. So now when I come over to Vite, you'll see my development server is still running. And when I refresh it, it's still rendering my application. Nothing has changed, right? At least nothing visually has changed, but the functionality that I'm about to implement has. So let's go into implementing our functionality now. If we go back here, we can see that children is also an array of objects, in which case we want our home, about, and our contact page to be our children. So let's start doing that. We open up an object. In this case, because this is the first object, I'm going to pass in index as true. And the element that I want to render is the home page. All right. Now I'm going to pass in my next element. Or actually, we'll leave it there. So now children. When we were talking about the JavaScript DOM, we know that there is such a thing as children, right? These are elements that are supposed to be children of the parent application. So the app itself is supposed to have the children of home.jsx. But home.jsx isn't showing up in my application. Why do we think that is? Can anybody take a stab? Just wild guesses at this point.
Is it because it's not routed to the path right now?
Okay, that's a great question, right? It could be the path element, but I want us to think about the way things are being rendered onto my screen, right? We have my browser that sends a request to Vite. Vite then sends back index.html, which has the division of root. When it gets down to my script, it reads this main tag, right? Which sends back this router. And that router essentially says, hey, here's the element that you're going to render. It's going to be app.jsx. But our children aren't showing up. I can't see my pages just yet. Well, that's because app.jsx is being rendered, but there is no connection between the children and app.jsx. So there's one more element that I need to add to app.jsx, and this element is called the outlet. So now I can place in outlet, and outlet will essentially be our next level here. I'm going to put it in purple just so that we know it's important. And call the outlet. If you do not have an outlet, your index or your pages will not show up in your app.jsx. The outlet is what connects that element of children to app.jsx. So now if we go back to Vite, we can see homepage showing up on the screen. All right. So let's take a look at the GL draw. Browser sends a request to Vite. Vite sends back index.html. If we take a look at index.html, we can see that it renders an HTML doc type, goes to the entire header, gets to the division of root, which is what is rendered on the screen. And then we can see that it's calling a JavaScript. Here, it is referencing to main.jsx. Main.jsx grabs the division of root and tells it, hey, inside of this division, I am going to render my router. So we come over to the router. The router says, all right, well, what do you want me to render at the path of index? So at the very beginning path, we're going to render the element of app.jsx. And these are the current children that could be available to app.jsx. So then my router starts rendering app.jsx. And inside of app.jsx, we get this is the app. The outlet then connects all of the children, and that's how we get our nice homepage showing up on the screen. All right, I've been going on for quite a while, so I'm gonna go ahead and pause here and open up for questions. Does anyone have any questions over React Router, how it's functioning, and how we're getting this homepage to show up on the screen? Demi.
Yeah, can you just go through the outlet one more time, just so I have I'm like almost sure that I understand it.
Absolutely. Another way to think about this is you're creating your pages, right? And let's say that your pages just exist, right? Like they're components and they exist. But even if you put them inside of your router, they're not necessarily connected to the app yet, right? They just exist in this magical box on the outside. I'm gonna put it as the same color as the outlet. What the outlet does is it essentially connects this magical box and app.jsx so that we can actually speak to it back and forth and vice versa. Let me go ahead and just do it but this way. And then after that, it just runs a couple if statements where we're checking our path. Right? It says, hey, if path is equal to index or the slash, then return homepage.
Got you. And can you show like just the code too, just so I can see again?
Absolutely. So the code here is the outlet. And then here in the router, the children is essentially what this magical box here on the outside is. So let me go ahead and name that as well.
Oh, got you. Okay, okay. So you don't have to type outlet anywhere else besides the app.js or yeah, the app.jsx.
Correct. That's the only place where we need the outlet.
Yeah, okay. I was like, well, how are you referencing outlet? But children, I guess, is connected to outlet.
Correct. Yes.
Got you. Okay. And is that just like a internal thing with React? It just knows like when you're referring to outlet, it's making that connection to children.
It's an internal thing for React Router DOM, not React itself. It's the way the React Router functions. So the React
Gotcha.
Router knows that the outlet is for connecting to children,
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
of course. One.
Sorry. You said that they were running if statements to see which page to render. So what is it like continuously running those if statements and refreshing to see, okay, has anything changed, or is it every time that something gets manipulated on the page, that's when the if statements get re-rendered or reran?
Yeah, that's a great question. So essentially, if we really wanted to break out the code, what it looks like is it's keeping track of the window. So it has a use state. So it uses something like URL and then set URL. And from there, that makes it into a use state. That starts it at the index, right? And then once that is created, it has a use effect that is pretty much looking at the URL patterns. And this use effect has a dependency on the URL. So every time the URL pattern changes, which we're going to go into in the second portion of our lecture of how we can manipulate the URL pattern without refreshing our entire application. Every time the URL pattern changes, this if statement is then triggered. So it checks if the path is index or returns homepage. If it's something else, such as about, it would then return the about page. Did that answer your question, Juan? Got it. Thumbs up. All right. Awesome. James?
Can you go back to the main JSX
Main
page? So because of the router.jsx, main JSX does not import from app.jsx anymore. It's like router.jsx almost like plugged in between the two. Is that a way of thinking of it correctly?
Yes, that's correct. So the router
Yeah.
is not just adopting app and taking it in as a child.
Awesome, thank you.
Of course. Ryan?
Do you mind going to the app JSX real quick? So is the reason that even though the router defaults you to the home page, the H1 tag is still appearing? Is that because if it's in app JSX, it will like override and like go on all of the pages within it?
That is, yes, that's correct. So
Okay.
anything that stays within the app will show up in every page. So typically what you'll have here is something like you'll set up your page so that your header stays consistent and your footer stays consistent in every single page. So all of the content within the application will change, but something like your nav bar or whatever it is that you want on the top of your application will stay across the entire application.
Got it. Thank you.
Of course. James, is that a new question?
No, sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. Quan, is that a new question?
Yeah, I think I missed it. The router, I think object goes into main JSX. That's where we're putting it now instead of app JSX, right? It replaces it. That's
Yes,
it.
of
Thank you.
course. All right. So maybe we could clean this portion up a bit here. Let me try to make these a bit smaller. And let me try to add a new box here. I hope everybody can see why I always say that everything in web development is just boxes inside of boxes. All right, there you go. So now we can see the browser sends a request for index HTML. Index HTML is sent back. The division of root is then rendered, at which point main.jsx returns the router. The router then renders app.jsx, which has an outlet, and the outlet connects to children, checks what our current URL is, and because our URL is at index, it returns the home page. And that's why we can see here, we have app.jsx, our header, the home page, which is connected by the outlet, and a footer on line 26. All right, great. It doesn't seem like there are any other questions. I don't see anything inside of Yankee questions. So now I'm going to go ahead and push forward and add the remaining of our pages. I'm going to come over to router.jsx, and in router.jsx, I'm just simply going to add some paths and elements that I want to render. So for this example, I want to render an about page. And in my about page, I want to render, or excuse me, in the URL of about, I want to render my about page. Finally, one last child, which is going to be contact. And in this case, I want to render the contact page. All right, so now I have all three of my URL patterns. I can refresh my site. We can see that it still just shows me the home page. Everything is running, but how do I change these pages, right? So far I see homepage, but I want to make sure that the other ones also work. Well, remember there is a state function working on the URL pattern. So you could simply just type it in for now. And we'll go over later as to why we won't want to manipulate this directly. But for now, just for demonstrational purposes, let's go ahead and take a look at about. Well, now we can see that it changes to about page. And if we take a look at contact, we can see that it changes to contact page. So we have added URL patterns to our front end application where it is sending a request for index HTML and all of that works properly. The only thing being rendered by the browser is index HTML. Everything else is being handled by JavaScript. JavaScript is running this useState function here, where it's checking what the current URL pattern is. And once it gets back the current URL pattern, it just simply returns the element that we dictated that it should return when it matches that pattern. All right, does anyone have any questions over React Router DOM or applying these separate pages? All right, if there are no questions at all, then I'm gonna go ahead and ask you guys to walk me through the process of adding an additional page. Currently, I have 3 pages. I want to add one more. And this page, we're just gonna call it Yankee. All right, so how do I go about adding a Yankee page into my outlet or into my pages component that will actually be rendered on the screen? Let's hear it, Tristan.
So first you'd make another JSX file.
All right. So let me go into my terminal here. Now let me open this up so that we can actually visualize it. Where would I make this JSX file?
You said this one was just Yankee.
Yes.
Yeah, so you could just make it Yankee.jsx, but it would be under your pages where
right.
all your other JSXs are.
Yankee. And let's call it page.jsx. All right. JSX file has been made.
And then inside that file, you go ahead and code in there and create a new function. That would be, we just make this one Yankee page.
Okay.
And then you do the same thing as the other ones, which would be to return the H1 tag. And in this case, we could just put down like Yankee page.
Let's just do Yankee rocks for this one, huh?
And then after that, just was it return default? Or no, not export default, sorry.
All right, so we export default to Yankee page. Great. Okay, awesome. Great job, Tristan. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it off to someone else as far as connecting it to the router and how we could get that to connect to app.jsx.
You would just go to your router.jsx.
All right.
And then if it works properly, you shouldn't have to, or it'll import it automatically, create a new element in your children array.
Okay.
Do path quotes Yankee pay, or you can just name it whatever, Yankee / and then add your element, which would be a Yankee page. It should import it automatically, but if it doesn't, you'd have to import it at the top.
All right, awesome. And Haley, is there anything that I need to add into app.jsx to make it work properly?
Wouldn't you have to import it at the very top? Wait. No. I don't think you need to.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and check our application now. We can see our contact page is being rendered properly. Well, the browser's not responding how I want it to. All right, let's make sure we didn't break anything. So there's our home page. We go back to our about page. That also shows up. All right, so all 3 of our prior pages are working. When we go to Yankee, we get our Yankee rocks showing up on the browser. Fantastic. All right. Doesn't seem like there are any questions about what we've covered up to this point. So let me do a quick overview here. In part 1 of our lecture, we went ahead and created this pages directory in which we created 4 JSX files that are essentially components, but we are referencing to as pages for organizational purposes. We can make sure that they are pages and that they're being exported default. From there, we went into main.jsx, utilize our router provider so that we can utilize a router. We then created a router that renders the application and connects to children. And the way we make this connection to the children from app.jsx is by simply adding an outlet, which works as a connecting file between children and app.jsx. All right, any questions over anything that was covered over part 1 of our lecture?
Can I see the router code really quick?
Yes, let me go ahead and just send it here.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So everybody has it available. Any other questions? Oh, let me check the Zoom chat here. Oh, thank you, Roger, for answering the self-closing tag question. All right, doesn't seem like there are any other questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here. All right, picking up with part 2 of our lecture, we can see that we still have our Yankee project here. If I go over and I change this to about, we'll see our about page, and everything remains pretty much the same. Now, there's a couple of things that I want to change for my navigational purposes, right? I have my application, but now I want to implement some ability to navigate. So let's go into that. I'm going to go ahead and go into our app JSX. And actually, instead of going into app.jsx, I'm going to make a directory inside of source called components. And inside of said directory, I'm just going to simply make a navbar. All right, so here's my components. Here's navbar.jsx. And I'm going to make my component. Let's say, hey, navbar. This is a JSX file, so I eventually want to export default the navbar. And then I can go ahead and return. I'm just going to return some simple a UL that's going to have 3 LIs. And inside of each one of these list items, I want anchor tags with a link. All right. So there you go. There's my UL with 3 anchor tags. I'm just going to change these here. Going to go ahead and grab this from Vite. All right, so I know the first one should be home. We'll leave the second one as about. And then finally, we have our contact page, right? Let's go ahead and add that contact page. And I totally forgot about my last tag here, which is Yankee. All right. I'm gonna add some inline styling here. Display or style. All right, so there I have some inline styling just so that the navbar won't look too hectic. And I'm just going to replace this header with said navbar. So I'm going to come over to header, and I'm going to change it with my navbar component. Okay, great. So there's my navbar now. I can see that I'm currently at the about page. If I click on home, we have home page. If I click on about page, contact page, and we have Yankee Brock. So my navbar is working pretty well. I'm happy with it so far, but there's a small issue that I want to make sure that we are all tracking on. So let me get into this issue. of calling state, right? And it's not necessarily an issue. It's more something that we have to keep into consideration whenever we're working within React, because we are working on creating single page applications. So currently I have this use state here, which is going to represent a user. I want to create a use effect. And what this use effect is going to do is it's simply just going to console.log the user. And I wanted to do this operation every time the user changes. All right, so now we can see use effect. I have my console.log happening. I have my set user function. And now finally, let's add some functionality into this user function. I'm just going to go ahead and add a simple button here. And this button is going to be registered. I'm just going to name it register for now. And all it's going to do is it's going to set the user on click. And what it's going to do is it's going to set user to I am a user. All right, so let me open this up so we can see it. So we've created a use state variable here for a user, which is currently null. We're going to see it being logged into the console every time the user is being updated because we have it in our dependency list. And here we have a button that will just change the value of said user. All right, everything's running still. I'm going to go ahead and inspect my page. Let me get rid of all these old errors here and refresh it. All right, so there we get null from line 13 on app.jsx. Great. So I'm seeing that there is no user. Well, when I click on register, I now get I'm a user. So the current value of this user state is a string that says I'm a user. But now let's pay attention to the console. What happens when I click on one of these links? All right, so I clicked on that link. We get these two messages of connecting and connected, and then I get null. And notice that what I had before is now gone. So what just happened? What happened when I clicked on that anchor tag? What did that trigger?
Just went back to the default statement and it didn't retain the current user.
Okay, yes, that's one way to look at it, but I want to think about the browser behavior. What did the browser do?
Oh, it refreshed.
Did it re-render the
Refresh.
page?
Yeah, it completely re-rendered the entire application, right? The application is no longer a single page application. There was a separate request being sent to Vite, and specifically for this URL, and Vite was able to respond with index.html and render the correct content on the screen. But there was a new request and a new response that was processed, meaning that all of our state goes back to its default behavior. So that's not necessarily what I want. I don't want things to go back to their default behavior, and I don't want my browser to continuously send requests. As we talked about it earlier, I want this switching in between pages to be handled by JavaScript and not my browser and Vite working together as a server. So let's change that, right? Instead, in my navbar of utilizing anchor tags, what I am going to use is something called a link tag. So I'm simply going to go to the top of my page and I'm going to import link. And you'll see that that comes in from React Router DOM. Now a link tag works a little bit different. So a link, instead of going to this reference, it will say, hey, I want a link tag, and it goes to a backslash. And then we close the link tag. All right, so I could do it for all of my other classes here. Okay. I messed that up. I don't want those to be hrefs. I want those to be 2s.
Do you have to use the curly brackets or can you just use quotes?
You could use quotes. You do not have to utilize the curly brackets. No. What can I do? I can't do anything. All right. All right, so now we're going to be utilizing link tags to maneuver in between these elements. So I'm going to close it down, refresh the page. We can see that the page is set to null. First, I'm going to check my routing capabilities. If I click on home, it's still routing between pages, but notice there's no re-render, right? My console still has the same values. Well, if I click on register now, I'm a user on the browser, and I can still manipulate in between my different elements without losing, excuse me, the state of my application. Now, if my application is refreshed, I lose the state. So as long as my user continues to click on my links rather than altering the URL, which as we know from a user experience, the user will majority of the time utilize links, my state will remain the same. Now, we will go into this further as far as handling user navigation and how all that works later on once we go into the full stack week and we're working with a backend server. But for now, just remember, if you want to keep your state and you don't want your page to re-render, do not use anchor tags. Moving forward, utilize link tags within React so that you do not lose your state. All right, I'm going to open up for questions. And now I see a question from James.
Does using the link tag make the back and forward on the browser window function correctly, or is that still gonna come later?
Sorry, could you say your question one more time? I don't think I fully understood it.
Does anything we just did make the back arrow on the actual like Chrome browser work at all, or do we not know how to use that yet?
Got it. Great question. So currently I'm inside of Yankee. If I click on back, right, it throws me back to contacts. And if I go back forward, it throws me back to Yankee questions. So the back and left arrows are working. If I were to extend on this, this is actually interacting with the browser and manipulating the browser itself. So when I click on that link tag, I guess that would be a separate function. When I click on that link tag, it has almost like an on-click method. And what this on-click method does is it says, hey, window.location is equal to URL pattern. And then once that happens, well, then our use effect is triggered and it renders the correct page. But everything inside of Google, we're essentially just taking this navigation capability or this navigation function away from Google or the browser and giving it to my JavaScript. Did that answer your question, James?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Any other questions? Okay, if no one has any other questions, then let's go into adding a couple of catching references. Because now we're messing with URLs. So it's important that we also understand how to handle what pages are going to be rendered on the screen. So for example, if I go over to github.com, and after I go over to GitHub, I go to the right and I add a ridiculous amount of gibberish, it gives me a 404 page. Now, what does this 404 page come from? How is it created? Or how could we mimic this behavior to say that, hey, this URL pattern doesn't exist in our front-end application? Well, we could go into our pages. we can create a new file and name this, we could say not found page.jsx. And for this not found page, we can just say, hey, const not found page is a function that will return JSX. And all it is returning is an H1 saying page not found. We could even get a little bit fancy with it. I would say div. And let's go into some display here. I want to make sure we're able to see what I'm doing here. Okay, line item center, and let's do width 100%. And let's do height of 100 view height. All right, so that will display it centered on my screen. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and export default my not found page. All right, so there's my entire page. It's just going to show me an H1 centered on my screen saying, hey, this page was not found. Well, now to implement it into the router, all of these URL patterns, they exist, and I'm dictating where they exist. Well, for any URL patterns that are not being accounted for, what I can do is pass in a path with a star that is called a wildcard, saying, hey, if anything else that gets passed into these children that I don't have here, please just show the following element. And the element that I want to show is a not found page. All right. Let's go ahead and take a look now at our application. We take a look at our application, we click home, nothing has changed. Let me kill this and refresh it. Everything's still working. Well, now I'm going to go ahead and add something to the URL pattern. Oh, hello. Now I'm going to go ahead and add something to the URL pattern and send my request. And now we get, hey, this page was not found, showing up on my screen saying this was not found. All right, let's go ahead and open it up for questions. I saw a couple of questions go up and then go back down, but let's hear from Tristan first.
Yes, would this be the same kind of concept as using the try catch?
Almost, right? In this case, we're not really identifying an error. We're just simply identifying that we don't have a URL pattern. So the way that I like to think about this is an else statement, right? Then we have our if, else if, and we continue doing else if statements. And once we don't have any more URL patterns to show, we just throw an else, saying anything else other than these URL patterns, show the not found page, not a try and catch.
Okay, and just to confirm, the star is like, hey, if this is anything else.
Exactly. Yes, it's a wild card. It's saying anything besides what I've described, show not found.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions? Okay, I don't see anything in Yankee questions either. So let's go ahead and continue moving forward. All right, so now to address the earlier question of, hey, we have our if statements here. We're handling if so and so and so and so. So we go into our pattern of our use effect where we have created all of our if statements. And now we have an else saying else. Then I want to return page not found. All right. Well, what if this entire function, at some point, it's going to run into an error? Well, in that case, I would simply, wait, if I can do this. Indentations are important. In that case, I would want to place it within a try and catch block. And my catch block would then return an error page. Let me scroll down here. All right, my use effect is keeping track of all these different patterns. We now know what to do if that pattern doesn't exist. But what if one of these pages runs into an error? Right? I don't necessarily want my user to just deal with a broken application and not get any sort of notification saying, hey, something went wrong. You may want to try this operation from scratch again, or you should contact us, something along those lines, right? Well, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and now create a new page, which I'm going to call my error page. And I'm going to repeat the process here. I'm going to make my error page. My error page is going to return probably something very similar to my not found page. So I'm just going to take this return statement here. And instead I'm going to say, hey, something went wrong. Contact us at 555-5555. There you go. All right. And then I'm going to go ahead and export default. And in this export default, I want to export error page. All right, so now I've created my page. My error page has been created, but now I need to connect it to my router. Well, in order to connect it to my router, all I need to do is after all of these children or before, this is an object, so it doesn't really care about the order that you're throwing things in. The array definitely cares about the order, so please keep in mind that you have to keep this wildcard at the very end. But as far as the object, it doesn't care of the order, it just cares that it has all the key value pairs. So now I'm going to add this error element, and this error element will be my error page. All right. Everything in our application still works. I can still go back home. But now let's go ahead and cause an error. Let's see. I'm going to make a button. I'm going to make this raise error. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to should do this. Let's say on click, we are going to set user to user +1, and that should break. All right, so everything is working well. If I inspect my console, you can see that the user is in fact null. And when I click on raise error, we get an error showing up. Assignment to constant variable. Oh, this error is not working the way I thought it was going to be working. Let's do null +1. Why not? All right. Oh, that actually works because JavaScript. Why wouldn't that work? It's a lot harder to break an application on purpose than I thought it would be. So let me try to break it without thinking about it. This should break it. There you go. All right, so I made a syntactical error rather than a user error, which is okay. This works to demonstrate the functionality. But in the case the user were to cause an error within our web page, they would get this page showing up saying, hey, something went wrong. Contact us at 555-555-555. All right, and that is the error element. So clear difference about the error element. The error element will arise when there is an actual error in our logic, whereas the not found element will be risen whenever a URL pattern is passed that has not been dictated before. All right, let's open it up for questions. Let's hear from Owen.
Can you go back to your router.jsx so I can just see the syntax?
Yes. Here, let me send it on our
Thank you.
Get out of here.
We do the same for navbar.
The nav bar, you said?
Yes.
All right. All right, Juan.
So we're adding the contact information in there just as a reference, but this is only because this isn't just like error 404, like we couldn't find it. This is something actually broke in the application, and that's why we're raising this error.
Exactly. Yes, this is
Okay.
something actually went wrong in the application. The user may be trying to accomplish something. One, we need to know, and two, we want user satisfaction, so they need a way to contact us. All right. Any other questions? And I don't think so, Gary. I think it's the fact that when you're actively thinking about breaking an application, it's a lot harder than you think it is. All right. I don't see anything in Yankee questions. We still have quite a bit of time. So something important that I would like to demonstrate is how to utilize Bootstrap to increase our navbar here. Specifically when you're using the React router. So I'm going to go back to our good old app.jsx here. I'm going to comment out this button so that it's no longer being cracked or it's no longer breaking our code. And we're going to utilize a Bootstrap navbar instead of what we have up there. So let's go over to Bootstrap and go through the installer process. All right, so here we have React Bootstrap getting started. It gives me my npm command. So let me go ahead and run that here. Gonna place it on my project. And there I am installing all of my information. All right, so Bootstrap has been installed. I need to grab this CSS here and put it within my main.jsx right above my index CSS. Oh, well, there was a lot of blank spaces there. All right, so there's Bootstrap dist, CSS. All right, now we have Bootstrap available for us. Great. From there, I'm going to check out components, and inside of components, there is a navbar that I am going to steal from Bootstrap. And I believe it's this one. I like this one because it turns into a hamburger. I don't know why, but I'm a big fan of the hamburger menus. Right, so here it gives me all of this gibberish that will go into deciphering as to what we need and what we don't need. So I'm just going to copy that bad boy. And I'm going to come over to my navbar. And I'm just simply going to paste it in my navbar file. Now I'll work through getting rid through what I need and what I don't need. So I definitely don't need that export default navbar. I don't want this basic example to be my thing. I do want all these import statements though, so I'm going to bring them to the top. And after I finish resetting all of this, I'll go ahead and share it with everybody. All right, so there's my navbar. If I go over to my V project, you can see I have the navbar from Bootstrap now. Oh, it's not hamburgering the way I thought it was going to. Okay, so it looks like we're on a permanent hamburger, which we'll have to figure out later on. All right, I likely just grabbed the wrong navbar, and that's okay. Let me go ahead and share this file with everybody so everybody has access to it in case you're trying to follow along. All right, and now let's go into our project or what we want to change here. So first of all, I see this nav dropdown. I really don't think we need a nav dropdown, so I'm just going to gut that right out of the project. I know I don't need it. We can see that we have the React Bootstrap here, and we could just call this routing example. That's going to be the name of our project. And we know that that's going to send us home. So I don't want to have it repeated twice. So I'm just going to add contact. And I'm going to add about. All right, now let's take a look at our project. So in my project, when I open up my navbar, I can see that I have contact and about. If I click on them, they take me to weird places right now. They're not really working the way they're supposed to, and that's okay. That is happening because of the way that I have designed them yet. Now, Bootstrap knows, or someone came along in Bootstrap and said, hey, we want to be able to utilize these styling components, but we don't always want to create multi-pages applications. Sometimes we want to create single page applications, or sometimes we work with external libraries and I need this functionality to work a little bit differently than what comes straight out of the box from React Bootstrap. So how do I change that? Well, React Bootstrap met everybody halfway, and essentially it gave us a way to add this as component. And we can say, hey, I want you to as a link, and I want you to have the property of to home. All right, and we could do that to all of our other links here. We can say as, add link in there, and then add our to properties, which in this case, we want this one to go to about, and we want this one to go to, oh, I got those backwards. Contact. So I didn't necessarily change much of what came from React Bootstrap. React Bootstrap is still working. Notice this nav.link isn't, this link here isn't from React Router DOM. It's a subclass of nav, right? It's an attribute that belongs to the class of nav. Now we have this as statement, where we're actually telling it, we want you to act as a link from React Router DOM. And here is the to attribute that you need in order to function properly. You'll notice nothing changes on my browser. I can go ahead and inspect. Let me open this up a bit. Come over to my console. Let's refresh it. You can click on register. Here's my I'm a user showing up. I can click on contact, click on about. There we get the about page. I never lost my user state. I can click on the routing example and it takes me back to my home page as well. All right, so I just grabbed the nav bar from React Bootstrap. I brought it in and all I really had to change was add an attribute of as, where I described that this is going to act as a React Router DOM link. And I changed the href property to a to, so that it can work with the link. I think you could do something like this too. Oh, I'm wrong. Oh, I mean, that did work. We have it for the button. Oh, there's a way that you can change the background body as well. Maybe it's this here. Let's do this. Oh, there you go. All right, we get the background body to dark, and then you can just change the text to light. There's a couple of things that you can do here to mess around with your React Bootstrap navbar. And you can find these different classes and properties inside of the navbar statement. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom, they have a whole nice little column saying, hey, these are the different classes that you can give to the prefix. So here we can see that this is a background. You could have it light, dark. You could add a couple of variants. It tells you if you want it position fixed, where you want it fixed, and so on. I'm a fan of React Bootstrap, so I like to demonstrate it in a lot of my examples. I also know that when we're working in our projects and we want to make our projects look nice, but we're working within a deadline, React Bootstrap can really come in handy. All right. Does anyone have any questions over how we were able to grab this navbar from React Bootstrap and use it within our project? Let's hear it, Juan.
Not about whether or not to grab it and stuff, but specifically for the as keyword, can I use multiple tags, like abbreviations in there? For example, if I wanted to use a link tag and I don't know, a button tag, if it's not already a button.
I don't believe so. So here we
Okay.
can see we have the as tag, and it says sets a custom element for this component, but it only takes in one element type, so it won't take in multiples in this case. All right. Any other questions? Does anyone have any? All right, let me do a quick overview, and then after that, we'll open up questions for the entire lecture. So in part 2, we went into our router. We decided, hey, we want to account for URL patterns that we may not have described. So we added this not found page by placing it inside of a wildcard. Remember, this is an array, so it does care about the order. You have to ensure that this wildcard comes at the very end. Otherwise, it may trigger prematurely. All right, so there's our not found page. Then we wanted to account for errors being caused by either the user or a developer. Well, we want to be able to catch those errors, and that's why we have an error page that will be shown up to the user to let them know, hey, something went wrong. You can either contact us at this number, or you could try the operation again. All right. Both of those pages just return an H1 element that is centered, and they are all connected by the outlet. Then we went into our routing functionality by creating a navbar. Now this navbar is just simply a bootstrap navbar. We added an as attribute to tell it that we wanted to act as a link for React Router DOM. And we also have a to attribute to give the link tag an operation as to where it is supposed to route us. All right, at this point, does anyone have any questions over anything that was covered during part 2 of our lecture? All right, if no one has any questions for me, then I have a question for the class. What is the main difference between anchor tags and link tags? Let's hear it, Tristan.
The anchor tags, they work in the sense of being able to click on a link and visit wherever that link goes, but the link tag will keep your state for your user and it won't reset the default.
Perfect. So link tags will keep your state. Anchor tags will actually still maneuver. Okay, so that's definitely something key, and I that's the key concept that we do want to take away. But I also want everyone to know an anchor tag triggers a request, a re-render of the application. When you click on that anchor tag, the browser is actively sending a request to the server saying, hey, I need a new set of content to show to the client. While a link tag is simply saying, browser, I don't want you to do anything. Let me take over. I'll manipulate the URL pattern for you. Don't worry about it. And then it handles JavaScript. In JavaScript, the change of content of what's being demonstrated to the client, but there is never a communication to an external browser. All right. Awesome, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. It is officially 11:25. Let me go ahead and stop our recording now.